Hello, my name is Pastor Amy Kienzle, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the beta version of a new podcast I hope to launch in full in the very near future. We planned a full launch before the COVID-19 pandemic put a lot of things on pause. For now, this podcast will be periodic as I work to make new connections with our Sacramento neighbors and find where God is at work all around us. That is why the name of this new podcast is Sacramental Sacramento. We can lose sight of how God is at work out there in our world, among the joys and sorrows and complexities of daily life, reflected there in the faces of our co-workers, the person in the grocery store, in the work of public officials, and in the creative expressions of people across all of the boundaries that we put up. Jesus was a boundary crosser, eating and socializing with people considered outside the bounds of God's reach, helping them to see how God was not far from them, but at work among them. In this podcast, I hope to share with you conversations that span not just the Christian experience, talking even with those who identify as non-Christians or atheists. Still, the breath of God and the image of God have been given to them, and God uses them and their gifts for the mission of blessing and saving the world. Our first episode focuses on topics that have different implications for racial justice in our community, our state, and our nation. Back in February, a group from St. John's joined others from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America in San Diego for a cross-border experience. In March, we sat down to reflect on what it was like to worship on the other side of the border with Mexico, and to visit several residential outreach centers, housing people who are waiting to cross into the United States, seeking security and opportunity. In another conversation, I sat down with a member of St. John's, Jim Ketty, who runs Youth Forward, an organization that empowers young people to use their voice for change in California. They seek investment in neighborhoods where youth have less access to resources and programs. They invest in young people for the sake of building stronger communities and families in our own city. I spoke with Jim in March, just after ballot measure G failed to pass. It called for budget money to be set aside specifically for youth programs. Jim expressed some disappointment, but also determination to influence the city to make funding youth a priority. We talked about why he believes working for youth and families is faithful work. I hope you find this podcast meaningful and thought-provoking. And if you have seen God at work somewhere or in someone, please pass along the information so I can highlight it here on Sacramental Sacramento. Here to join us are Rob Sawyer, Vicar Carolyn, and Barbara Beto, and we're here to share our border experience. Barbara, tell us about your experience.
Well, it was December, I think, November, December, when the word came out about this, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to go. And you really put my mind at ease about it, and told me some other people that were going, and I felt really comfortable. So, with all the other Christmas expenses, I signed up to go to the border, and it was wonderful. It was really a terrific experience. And
what were you hoping for? You know, you seemed excited. You had questions back then, but what was your hope for this experience?
I did. I wanted to find another way in my life to deal with things that are going on in our world that I felt down about, that I couldn't control, that I wanted to make a contribution. And I just wanted to see if maybe this would help me to be a better person myself and give more and learn more. I listen to a lot of NPR radio and hear a lot of interviews and problems that are happening, families being separated, things like that. And it made me feel really sad. So I was hoping that I could learn more, which I did. Yeah,
you said you had a really great experience. I know when we were there, you were saying how great it was. And so what made an impact on you?
Well, I thought we walked across the border because it takes a long time to drive back. And so walking across the border was sort of like the first part of immersing ourselves in the experience. Yeah. It was a beautiful day, no rain. We had a wonderful day. We walked across and got on buses and went to, and I'm not sure of the name. I think it was called Friendship Park. Was it Friendship Park?
I believe so. Yeah, in Tijuana, on the Mexico side.
Where the wall goes into the sea, and that was just having a church service there was just fantastic.
Yeah.
And seeing all the people that represent our church, both in this country and in Mexico, it was really terrific.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed seeing the wall, and I guess the Mexican side of the wall is a lot more beautiful than the American side of the wall. It's all decorated.
Yeah, the people made sort of resistance art on that side of the wall.
Yes, it was really nice. And one of the things that I really liked was part of the service was the Immigrant's Creed. Mm-hmm. And I think that Rob was really impressed by that too.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. So after the service, and everything went off like clockwork. I couldn't believe it. Maybe we got a little bit behind, but we always caught up, and it
maybe
was
that was
great.
our German Lutheran heritage getting
I guess so.
keeping us on time. But yeah,
we did a great job. And then afterwards, we went to 3 different shelters, and the one that I went to was called Instituto Madre Asunta, mm-hmm. and we were so blessed to have been treated to a lunch there. It was really wonderful food, just simple but wonderful.
Yeah, and I joined you there too. Yeah, that was really sweet.
Right, and to meet some of the women. It's a shelter for women and children, and to meet some of the women who were in the process of immigrating and talk to them and hear about their experience. And one of the other things that really impressed me about that shelter was after everyone at the shelter was done eating, all the women and children and us, then other people were invited in. And one of the people said, not a bit of food is wasted.
Wow. I didn't even notice that. So other people that were out
that were waiting at the gate,
wow.
They were waiting mm-hmm. They were waiting patiently, quietly for everyone to finish eating, and then they were fed too.
Yeah, wow.
But it really impressed me that she said not a drop of food is wasted.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I mean, when they told their story about how many people they sometimes have to help depending on how the immigration situation changes at the border, right. She said 200 and some people were in a space for 45 when the caravans were coming up, or when the Haitian people came up because of crises in their own countries, and that they just opened their doors to as many people as they can fit.
Yeah, we spoke, I think you were speaking with the same woman. We spoke to a wonderful woman who was in the process of immigrating. And I asked her, I said, so how many people do you share a room with? And she said, 20.
Yeah. Yeah, sort of a dormitory style or something, I think.
Yeah, and after we ate, then the nuns who run the shelter spoke with us and told us about the shelter and the different types of care that they give to people. They give spiritual care, of course, and they give food and sleep. And without those things, nobody can feel better without food and sleep.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, Barbara.
Mm-hmm.
Rob, did you want to share about your experience? And you went to a different place. I think Carolyn and Barbara and I all went to the Casa Madre Asunta, but you went to a different place. And
our group, when we split up after the cross-border service, we went to the Casa del Migrantes, which was it's a large facility that's had to adjust because of changes. When I first heard about this border experience, I was very curious and really eager to join other people from St. John's, because I've been to Mexico a number of times. I've been along the border a number of times, but it had been some years, and I sort of wanted to see for myself, what has changed, what are the challenges today. And it was a very different experience. As listeners to the podcast may not know, we did not have a cross-border worship service at Friendship Park because the United States has established a no man's land that extends for a couple hundred feet north of the actual border, and it's patrolled and kept clear. And then it wasn't clear to me, but I believe California State Parks runs the U.S. side of Friendship Park, and it had been closed.
Yeah.
And so the group that stayed in the United States, apparently they were on a hillside where way off in the distance they might have seen us, but it didn't come off as I had sort of hoped and envisioned as a waving to each other. Here we are worshiping on both sides of the border.
Well, and I think even as the LCA had planned, we thought we'd be able to at least see each other. So that was. But
I had experiences on the border over the years, including some years ago hiking in the mountains where the border is east in Imperial County, where the border at that time, and it may now have a wall, was nothing but these neat-looking little concrete monuments every couple of hundred feet in very rugged territory, and hiking with the kids and a brother-in-law down there on some of the mountains. It was interesting. We'd interact and see border agents in their four-wheel drive vehicles on these dirt roads. That was about it, but no one there in sort of a beautiful moonscape of mountains. It's extremely dry, all the way to early memories in Tijuana Friendship Park, where the fence did go out into the ocean. But as those of you here may recall, there was a monument in Friendship Park that had the exact delineation of the border, and that was part of the area where we were worshiping. But that exact spot on that monument is about 3 feet in from where the United States has built the wall. And someone had told me there had been some discussion when the newest additions to the wall were going in of, we need to tear that monument down. And the folks on the Mexican side, no way, you're not going to do that. So I guess as we walk around that monument, maybe we were in the United States for 1.5 feet or something. Huh. And so I was very curious about the experience to learn, also curious about us as a group. And that was part of the experience. This was part of a large conference in San Diego on congregational vitality. And it appeared to me, I might not have counted accurately, but a very high percentage of ordained people, a very high percentage of people who had positions in their churches or in their dioceses having to do with congregational growth and vitality. And a little bit of a surprise when I would be asked, what's your position in the church? Well, I show up and sing, It's
right. We did. I think our synod had like the largest contingent and of lay people as well from churches, which I think we should be proud of that because.
I don't know if it's a matter of pride, but it was kind of nice to think of it, not just St. John's, but our synod as well. And seeing Bishop Mark there, that it was sort of a family event for us. We're really kind of a family here. We all go together. And that part I really appreciated. What struck me listening to the different approaches, the speakers and celebrants at the worship service and then at Casa del Migrante is a sort of a different way of thinking about what's going on in the world now, that this is not a question of immigration, it's a question of migration. And it's a challenge many countries are facing, if not all countries, that has a lot of causes and a lot of different symptoms. And I think one of the things that really struck me, a few years ago, I was in Mexico in Michoacan, which is a big avocado producing area, and there on business related, having to do with agricultural business, and seemed like a very nice place, a beautiful area, volcanic area with resorts and parks and avocado groves. And learning from the people at the Casa del Migrante that we're not just talking about Central American refugees or people coming from West Africa or from Haiti looking for a better life, but that they are challenged with internal migration in Mexico as people are moving north to the border, and they're having to serve at Casa del Migrante families who are trying to escape cartel violence in Michoacan. Right. So it's and when you look at all of the causes, I was thinking about this. Most people end up living most of their life pretty close to where they were born. There's a good reason for that. You grow up in a place, you like it. I'm a Californian. I've lived in different places in California in my life, but for the most part, it's always been California. And it's hard to imagine what conditions would cause someone to move to a completely different country where they don't speak the language, where the culture is different, everything is different. But the causes range from pure survival in the face of violence in countries where the civil systems are falling apart for whatever reasons, for example, in Guatemala and Honduras, all the way to what we're facing now in climate migration, right, where, what was an agricultural economy becomes impossible and people have no choice, either starve to death or go somewhere else. That broader scope of thinking about it that was brought up by so many of the people we met with was an eye-opener.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So Vicar Carolyn, I know you joined Barbara and me at the Instituto Madre Asunta, and where we talked with the women and the children there on the, was it the Cabrini sisters? Was it Calabrini?
I think it was Calabrini or something.
Where the Calabrini sisters
Scalabrini or something
are ministering to migrant people and people facing challenges in the immigration system. So what was your, what things were impactful to you, or what did you take away?
Well, from our time at the program that supports people who are waiting for their asylum cases to be heard, I was really struck that this is basically a shelter, something that I ran when I was a nonprofit executive here in Sacramento. I ran a shelter for families, and it was very similar. The programming was similar, how they supported the individuals, the services, and I found a lot of comfort in that it was not just food and housing, but that they supported people with a variety of services. And when we spoke with the individuals in the program, they were happy. They weren't there grieving, oh, the staff is unkind or anything like that. They were happy to be there. They were happy to be in a place where they were safe, where they had food and shelter and access to laundry and services. And so for me, that gave my heart some comfort, because I listened to a lot of different news sources, and I worry about people, when we hear that we have a caravan of 1,000 immigrants coming to the border. How are their basic needs being met? And of course, in all three of the programs, the most that they can serve is 100, right, maybe 150. It doesn't meet demand, but at least for those individuals, it's making a huge difference in their lives. So that was my big aha from it.
Yeah, it's interesting, the parallels that we can see to humanitarian crises in different places, right? I mean, when you say that, how the number doesn't meet the need, like number of beds doesn't meet the needs of people, it sounds similar to like the unhoused situation here in Sacramento, right? And how we, as people of faith, or just as, people who care about others, it's like you wonder what happens to all the others. And of course, there must be other shelters and other organizations doing similar work. We went to these three places, or we're split into those three different places, but still, the demand is so overwhelming.
Absolutely. And you're right. There was a very clear parallel between kind of what services were offered and the people waiting for asylum to our unhoused population here in the greater Sacramento area. I just saw such a huge parallel between them. And the idea that the people being served really didn't have a lot of power, that they waited not just months, but one person I spoke to had been waiting 53 months.
Yeah. There's a young woman, yes, she was pregnant. And
yes. And to me, I just thought, wow, this is a long, slow, tedious process, and it's not quick.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we are given information where it seems like the process is much faster than what it really is.
Yeah, I was struck. I heard some of your conversation with that young woman, and how hopeful people still are. That she was like, I think it's going to happen soon. My papers are in, and and hopefully by the time the baby was born, or
she'd be here with her family.
With her family who's here, and our citizens, right?
Here. Right.
Yeah. I wonder if for all of us, what are there images that stick out to you from the trip that remain in your mind? Like for me, when we went to the Instituto Madre Asunta, like when we walked through the gate, the first thing I noticed was that there was someone in front of me who, like a young person, a young child, came and jumped in their arms, and I thought, oh, maybe this person has been here before, because it seems like they know her. But no, that was just then all the children came out and greeted us and just gave us these big hugs, like they had known us forever. And so that was one that stuck out to me, just kind of a moment of hope or love in the midst of what can be obviously a heavy situation or a heavy thing to hear, like the stories of people who are just waiting with no answers coming their way. That stuck out to me. But I don't know if anyone else wants to share, was there something that sticks out in your mind?
Well, for me, I think one thing that sticks out with people that I did hear and met that are trying to either settle in Tijuana from someplace else or trying to get legal admittance in the United States is that patience that you talked about. And individually, I'm amazed at the length of time these types of processes are taking, because I see it as strictly a budget issue. And I fear that there are some in the administration that see it, along with family separation, as sort of a demonstration issue. If we can make it hard enough, people will decide not to come. Mm-hmm. And I have two responses to that. One is, well, if you're starving or your life is threatened, you're going to come anyway.
Right.
And the other being, what are we missing? Who are the people that could come here and really contribute that we're making them wait? And one of the things that I wonder about is I have two sons-in-law who are from other countries. One who's now a U.S. citizen, immigrated after he married our daughter, grew up in Congo, Brazzaville, but when processing all of his papers, was living in Cape Town, South Africa. The other son-in-law is from Great Britain. And they went through this process each about 10 years ago for a spousal visa after the wedding. And I thought, well, England, that's going to be easy. They can come over here all the time. And a West African living in South Africa with 3 countries going through the process, that each of them took exactly the same amount of time, 1 year and 1 day. And which I found sort of amusing. But now I'm wondering if someone is trying to do that now with a known process like a spousal visa or some kind of employment visa, how long is it taking? But the patient part of it, one of the people who spoke with us at the Casa del Migrante had lived in the United States for many years. As he told us, he's originally from Guatemala, but had been working and living illegally, as it were, in California, working, married to a U.S. citizen, and he had 2 adult children. And at one point, about 2 years ago, was pulled over for speeding with no driver's license and all the rest of it. And so he was deported to Mexico. And he ended up using the services of Casa del Migrante, but he had an attitude of sort of like, I'm going to do what it takes. Mm-hmm. And since being deported and knowing no one and having them help resettle him. And just like the facility you went to, they had job counselors, they had people to try to help you find housing. He had found an apartment in Tijuana, and he had work. And he was coming back on a regular basis to the Casa del Migrante to help them, to advise others. And he was asked about his immigration status. Well, it's in process. He's trying to get into the United States. His wife and his kids can come visit him, but he can't go back to the U.S. And it's been a long time, and he thinks it'll be a long time to come. But he had this attitude of sort of, I'm just going to keep working on it, and I'm going to get there.
Yeah. Wow. Barbara, is there an image or something that sticks out to you?
No, I was going to say the one thing that I kind of regretted was that we couldn't participate in the discussion that night.
Yeah.
That would have been fun. Maybe we should have stayed over. One more
if
day.
we had planned a little more, there was, that extended free dessert too, we missed. And, dessert conversation, but it's a process.
Did you happen to hear anything about it?
No, I haven't heard. I could try and ask and see what came out of that, but.
That would be interesting because it was really wonderful being with all the people that were there.
Yeah.
That participated in the conference. I really enjoyed it. And I tried to meet some new people, some different people. And it was great. Yeah. That was great. Yeah. And our leader was wonderful. Mm-hmm. She did a terrific job. I thought it was a pretty monumental task of organization. Everything went very smoothly.
It did. Yeah. I can't imagine how long they had to plan. And even when they did the introduction to the day and how the event would go, explaining how long it took to negotiate the worship at the border and, and then to have sort of at the last minute say that the park was closed on the U.S. side was disappointing after doing all that work. But you're right. It must have been a monumental task to organize. And
we did take things with us. We were asked to take things with us. I think you left your backpack there, which was nice. A lot of people brought backpacks, and we brought toiletries and things.
Bibles in Spanish.
Yeah, so we were given Bible. Somebody had a huge supply of Bibles, and so I think we all took Bibles.
We divided them up
across in Spanish, and that was very well organized. And we were walking across the border. I was following this woman who we were kind of told to just you're going just for a day visit, just act like you're going for a day visit, just be casual and polite. And so we did. And when I was walking, I was following this woman who had a keyboard in her backpack. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe she just looked like she's placed a keyboard. She's taking it with her. Well, she turned out to be the woman who was playing the keyboard at our church service. Yeah. And she was wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
It was a really nice worship service.
Yeah, it was wonderful worship. Just like we have here. Exactly.
Yeah. Do you have an image, Vicar Carolyn, or something that sticks out to you?
Well, of course, mine isn't pleasant, my image. For me, something that really stood out and I found a little disturbing was the surveillance that occurred during our worship service. And it seemed excessive. Here we are, a group of Lutherans, people of faith, gathered together to pray and worship. And it wasn't enough that they deployed several vehicles, but that they had a drone kind of buzzing the group, and then a helicopter buzzing us and it wasn't just for a minute, it was for what seemed like 5 or 10. Mm-hmm. It might have been shorter than that, but it seemed a really long time. And that really disturbed me. I just felt like it was a horrible waste of financial resources. And I just felt it was so unnecessary, that this isn't, we're not like a radical group of people. If anything, I would think Lutherans would be like the opposite of radical. And so
we have our moments.
We have our moments, but it wasn't there. And it interrupted the worship. The sound detracted from the experience. So for me, that was something that really bothered me.
Yeah.
I shared with you that I was telling my husband this, and my husband is in law enforcement. And I was still very upset when I got home, and I was sharing that, I just felt like this was so unnecessary. And it's so interesting when we get feedback from somebody who has a totally different periscope on how they see the world. And he said to me, honey, I think it's wonderful because they were doing surveillance. So if anything happened, they knew who you were. And I thought, well, what an interesting perspective. It's not my perspective, but I appreciate that he sees the world through his law enforcement eyes. And so it kind of calmed me down a little bit because there are different ways to interpret the same event. Yeah. And I was seeing it in the most negative, and my husband was probably seeing it in the most positive.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting to me, and not necessarily amusing, but that the drone and the helicopter very carefully stayed on the U.S. side. But the contrast between the U.S. side and the Mexican side is very revealing. Where we were at Friendship Park, I took a walk a number of blocks down the street where the restaurants and cafes were opening up, and there are a lot of little hotels on the beach, and the big bullfight ring there is very busy. Fortunately for the parking for our buses, there was no bullfight when we were there, but that facility is a big deal in Tijuana, and life just going on as normal. People opening their shops and their restaurants, and also as we drove out, I was surprised by the number of very high-end homes being built right on the border. And some of the hills we crested, you could look down, and these were the kind of homes you'd see out in Gold River with big backyards that backed up right to the U.S.-built wall. And then on the U.S. side, beyond that wall, what you have is literally a scar along the entire border where you have a no man's land that's been cleared, and then a second wall that's a few hundred feet into the U.S. side. Yeah. And the contrast is sort of on the Mexican side, it's here and we're just going to go on with our life. And on the U.S. side, it seems to be, let's take all of this nice real estate out of commission so we can, prove that we're impenetrable. Yeah. With a system now that, of course, you can get through with a $100 electric hacksaw, or just go someplace else in an airplane, or go up to Canada and come through. Right. And it just impressed upon me the sort of, I would call it sort of a misuse of resources when money could be used to try to help people get home, for instance. Right. There are a number of people, refugees, who would rather be home than trying to come to the United States. Is there anything that the international community can do, that our country can do, that we can do as individuals to help deal with the problems that have driven them away, without, as we often do, just making things worse? Yeah. And so when I say it was amusing, it sort of made my teeth grate a little bit too, to see how much effort we were putting into construction and patrolling and surveillance just to, to prove how invincible we were.
Yeah. Well, it struck me when we were worshiping that we have a newly formed Lutheran church, Iglesia Luterana de Mexico. And that the bishop was there and the vice president of that church body. And so that was exciting to me. And as we were worshiping, there was another image that I took a picture of, and I'm sure you all saw that pinky, that art that had the pinkies locked at the top. And our preacher, kiss. Yes, and the preacher, Heidi Newmark, referenced it and explained that, the wall just kept getting bigger, and the divide kept getting bigger, as now, like Rob's saying, there's this no man's land and two walls. And so people used to be able to give peace through the wall or across and couldn't. And that then a grate had been placed over so that you could only put your pinky through at one point, and now you can't even touch. And that as Christians, when in our worship, whenever we give the peace, we're sort of saying that we defy those divisions between us, right? That Jesus was a border crosser, and that we then are too as followers of Jesus. And so we symbolically do that each time we worship, even here at St. John's. But there, when we got to give the pinky kiss, as you said, Barbara, during our peace sharing in that worship service, that was really powerful to me as sort of a defiance of the wall that we were worshiping at.
And that part of it, the progressive reduction in size of what you can push through the spaces on the wall, it almost had me thinking about the division in North and South Korea, where, like the Mexican border, it's a treaty accident based on geographic calculations rather than where families are or where the topography is. And particularly in Southern California, if you look back at the history of the indigenous peoples, the Spanish and the Mexicans, and then the imposition of a border after the U.S. Victory in the Mexican-American War, you begin to realize, well, people's cousins are on both sides. That's extended family. And that wall, from a cultural standpoint, is right in the middle of families. Yeah. Just as the border in Korea was imposed. And then looking at it as a construction project, if you were a railroad, you would say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to take the easiest grade up there, down here. But because that's the border, the U.S. is building a wall in some pretty challenging topography that ends up, as I say, looking like a big scar, and also as a construction project looking a little ridiculous in places.
Yeah. So are there any last thoughts or things people wanted to share?
One of the things that I just noticed, I was looking at the paperwork we had to fill out when we crossed the border, and it says tipo de viaje, type of trip. And it says tourist, business, education, transit, and otro. And mine was checked otro. And I kind of like that. Other. We were there for an other purpose.
Another purpose, yeah.
Not just tourist.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was really a learning trip, a solidarity trip, a seeking to understand, because I think that's what happens. And what I noticed about our border was a parallel to what I had seen in the Holy Land with the wall that Israel has constructed between parts of the West Bank. And, that really does separates Israelis from Palestinians, but also Palestinians from Palestinians. Like you were just saying, Rob, about families being separated. And that what ends up happening then is that what is on the other side and who is on the other side becomes sort of can be anything our imagination dreams up, right? And it ends up being a picture of an enemy more than a friend. And so the LCA has a Peace Not Walls campaign for the Middle East, for the Holy Land, but I think also for our border that, we want to bring peace, not walls. And wherever we can unite and cross those borders, I think that is what God does call us to do as people of faith. And so we were there for an other purpose. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing some of your experience or what you took away from the experience at the border. I really appreciate you taking some time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pastor Amy Kienzle with the segment, What Does This Mean? Church and state are separate, but politics and faith are not. In fact, Jesus was political, and that's why we're here in the first place. With us today is Jim Keddy, Executive Director of Youth Forward and a member of St. John's. Youth Forward is a new and growing organization dedicated to supporting disadvantaged youth and youth of color through policy, advocacy, education, and community action. He's here to tell us more about Measure G, which was recently on the March ballot, issues that affect our local youth, and why people of faith should be engaged with these issues. Jim, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So if you would share a little bit of your background, I know we've talked in the past and you've done a fair amount of like faith-based organizing. And so maybe just talk a little bit about that before we talk more about Measure G and some of the issues affecting our city and our youth who live here.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I grew up in a traditional Irish Catholic family. And when I was a kid, somebody gave me these little pocketbooks of the Gospels. And the Gospel of Luke was my favorite. And I kind of grew up with the Jesus stories. And I think over time, it provided a lot of formation to, the way I wanted to be and the way I wanted to be in the world. And I began to be attracted to social justice work in high school. And at that same time, I came across the writer Thomas Merton, who kind of opened up this new world for me where I realized that faith and action and social change could all come together, that faith wasn't just something that was relevant inside the walls of the church on a Sunday morning. And then by the time I went off to college, I became active in Catholic student movements and sort of the beginning of liberation theology and conversations around that. So when I came across faith-based organizing as a young adult, it just kind of all came together for me because I wanted to work in a faith context. I went and did a graduate degree in theology as a way to kind of better educate myself. But I did want to work in a social change context that was driven by sort of a core of faith values.
Yeah. And you recently joined St. John's. You went through
I
Luminary
did.
in the fall.
Yes.
And I know even before that, you had come to meet with our public witness committee about the SacKids First initiative that then led to the Measure G on the ballot in March. Why did you bring that to that group? And why do you think it's important for people of faith to be engaged publicly in that way?
Yeah. Well, I was attracted to St. John's because of the whole message of living God's love in the world and the way that St. John seeks to integrate what's happening in the world around us with how we live out our faith as Christians. And as we started to work on winning a greater public investment in children and youth in the city, it just struck me that might be something that St. John's would want to have some connection to or have a conversation about. And I think it's important to recognize that there have been a group of us over many years trying to win a greater investment in children of youth, and particularly with low-income children and children of color in Sacramento. Measure G is just the latest iteration of our work.
Yeah.
And what we see in Sacramento is kind of a consistent underinvestment in poor children and children of color, and watching young people struggle. We in my organization, I have young people of color and young people who came from disadvantaged backgrounds on my board of directors, on my staff. So it's all kind of woven into the work we do and what we're trying to be about. My organization, as well as others that make up SacKids First.
Yeah, what struck me when we talked about your work was that you seek to empower, and I guess this is traditional community organizing, but even with youth, you seek to empower those young people to speak about what they need and what they want most, or what would make an impact in their lives.
Yeah, we believe that young people have to be part of fashioning the solutions. As adults, we can be pretty out of touch with the current context faced by young people. There's this term used, which is adultism. And adultism is essentially the bias adults have against young people, or viewing them as, they shouldn't have a voice, that they have to grow up first. Another part of adultism is just that adults create a world that works for adults.
Right.
And young people are an add-on.
Yeah.
And in the city of Sacramento, children and young people have been an add-on for many years, like in the city budget. Children and youth programs have always been the first cut, the last funded in the city budget. The city budget is dominated by the police and fire unions. They have the most influence over what happens. And so Measure G was an attempt to shift that conversation to lift up, young people, the voices of young people, with how they perceive Sacramento, which is different than the way adults would.
Yeah.
And when you look at the big investments Sacramento's made in the basketball arena, the soccer arena, entertainment, but market rate housing. I mean, who does that serve?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's striking when you read the Gospels and Jesus says, receive the kingdom as a child would, right? And yet, if we don't hear the voices of children, then how do we know what the kingdom should look like?
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little about SacKids First and what it was meant to do? I know it was disappointing that it didn't pass, Measure G didn't pass on the March ballot, and that there were some countermeasures. But what was the intention? I know St. John's sent a letter to the mayor and copied the city council to support putting it on the March ballot so that there would be time to implement it. But what were you hoping would happen?
Well, our goal was, we had really three goals. One was to create a stable funding source for children and youth. The second was to create a strategic plan on how to best invest in children and youth. And that plan included giving a priority to children most impacted by poverty, violence, and trauma. The city really has no coherent plan on how it invests in children and youth now. In my opinion and what I've seen over the years, it tends to be driven by the politics of the moment.
Right.
And then the third was to have an evaluation so we could see what progress we're making towards creating greater opportunity for disadvantaged young people and kids. So that really makes up the core of Measure G. It would have required the city to set aside a small percentage of its general fund for children and youth, 2.5%. And it would have required the city not to cut children and youth spending below its current level.
Yeah. So what do you think people of faith could do to support kids' initiatives going forward?
Yeah. Well, SacKids First is an ongoing coalition. As I mentioned, this has been a much longer term effort of many of us in the city. That includes community organizations, educators, groups like the NAACP and others, right? So we're always looking for people who want to be part of SacKids First. You can sign up through SacKidsFirst.org, and then you'll be on our list. You'll be invited to meetings as we try to figure out what the next phase of work is. The mayor and council are in the process of placing a measure on the November ballot that would create a children and youth fund. And we're kind of regrouping now to figure out how we want to inform that effort. I do think that one of the products of the Measure G campaign was to essentially force the city council to think about doing things differently and having more stability in the funding for children and youth services. So, I expect that we will continue to be advocating around those issues. I also want to say, too, that in addition to looking at city services, the other reality we live with is underfunded public schools and an underfunded kind of general infrastructure for kids. So there's like two different realities in Sacramento. There's the reality of more affluent families who can afford to pay for their children,
right,
to be like in really great summer programs or to go to a private school or know how to work the system to get their child into the best public school. And then there's families who are low-wage workers, who are, barely making ends meet, struggling with rising rents in Sacramento. Their children are in underfunded public schools. And during the summertime, they rely on what public programs might be out there.
Right.
Those kids often fall behind during the summer due to the sort of a lack of enrichment. So, they say that summer is one of those key times when, children can improve their reading skills, go into the next school year stronger.
Yeah.
Low-income children tend to fall behind, which then affects the rest of their kind of academic career. Sets them back, affects their life opportunities. So that's some of what I think we just need to be more aware of and see if as a community we can come together and be determined enough to do something real about it and get beyond, rhetoric and efforts that come and go.
Yeah.
I guess another dynamic I've been watching in young people, I've been working on kids issues now for about 30 years in public policy, was that we went through a long period of time in which we really looked at criminalizing youth. We created zero tolerance policies in schools that increased suspensions and expulsions. And those suspensions and expulsions were disproportionately affected Black and brown kids, right?
Right.
We increased penalties against children and youth, treating some juveniles more and more as adults, creating longer prison sentences. And it kind of comes from this overall sort of punishment mentality we have, which frankly I have not seen produce any positive result in our society with young people. We've started to turn the corner on that, and we're starting to look at restorative justice and other practices that help young people heal from trauma, learn how to manage anger, that creates community around really vulnerable, isolated youth or otherwise could be drawn into violent activity. And so that's one thing I'm hopeful about. And when I look at what I see in the Gospels and I look at the life of Jesus, what I see is a focus on healing, forgiveness, and also a real challenge to us when we treat people as an other. One of the things that Jesus has always shaken things up in the gospel is this notion of who is the other.
Right.
And his message just consistently is that everyone is part of God. No one is outside of God. So when I look at young people in the juvenile justice system, young people getting pushed out of school, they're part of us. They're part of the life of God. And public policies that otherize them are just simply wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I think our system often dehumanizes, and we make assumptions then about someone who is in the criminal justice system, that they're a bad person, or that they, and like you said, they sort of just get pushed out of society and forgotten about. And Jesus in the Gospels is like, well, when I was in prison, you visited me, in the sense that like you said, no one is out of the reach of God. And so as people of faith, we should really care what happens to people and be people of redemption and restoration.
And people that we may view as another, young people we may view as criminals or thugs, they're not only part of the life of God, but God is acting through them too.
Yeah.
They're
not out of the reach of grace.
Yeah. And in some ways they bring grace.
And can be a blessing to us too.
Yeah.
In ways that might be surprising and we can't see, but God has a different way of seeing things too. And,
during the SacKids First signature gathering part of the campaign, we worked with a whole team of people who had been formerly incarcerated, and they were part of our effort to collect signatures and get this on the ballot. They were very dedicated, worked very hard. They wanted to see something different happen for young people than what they went through,
right? Because
they recognized that the abuse and neglect they experienced growing up is part of what put them on the wrong path.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? If we can get to people early and give them opportunities and love and enrichment in their lives, it's only going to serve them better as adults and the world too, and our community. Like, we want that. Have you seen any places where there are programs that have helped and worked? I know there was some talk about what Oakland has done, but have you seen some hopeful programs that maybe we could think in the future would work here in Sacramento? Sure.
Oh yeah, I think there's a lot of really good work happening in the youth development field right now, and there are certainly a lot of there's programs here in Sacramento that are doing great work. My experience is that they're just at too small a scale, and they have no stability in their funding.
Right.
So I'll give you, by way of example, many years ago when Sacramento was gearing up to build a new basketball arena, I wanted to make sure that there was a youth jobs component in the arena. And I reached out to an organization called Juma Ventures in the Bay Area, which I've been following for quite a long time, that provides jobs to young people in sports arenas. And the unique thing about Juma Ventures is they focus on young people in the foster care system, young people who've been affected by sex trafficking, and young people in the continuation high schools. A lot of youth development programs don't have that focus. And so they the CEO came out here to Sacramento. We did some meetings with the council and with Mayor Johnson at the time and with the Sacramento Kings. And now Juma Ventures employs about 100 young people at the Golden One Center during basketball season, at the River Cats during baseball, and at Papa Murphy's for soccer. And in addition to providing them with a part-time job, they also provide different kinds of services to help young people learn how to apply to go to college, how to save money, how to have a bank account. So I'm on their advisory board. But again, it's an organization that could be doing more, reaching more young people.
Right. If it had the resources and the support, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The Lutheran Church, through Lutheran Social Services, recognizes that, youth in foster care are obviously vulnerable, and also that, when people reach 18, they're not done, the system kicks them out and there isn't support. And, so we take for granted, I think, sometimes what support we've had to get us where we are.
Oh, yeah.
And, that it does require
the backup we've had in our lives.
Yeah, we need social capital. We need community.
Yeah, we do.
And again, that's why the church is significant to us, right? Because it's community and it gives you a family and a support. And, and we could, as people of faith, be that for other people too, or make sure that we advocate for programs that would do that for people that are vulnerable, especially our youth. Well, thank you, Jim, for coming and talking with me today.
You're welcome.